what she had said through research, following up. Some of the follow-up he did with Mother under his custody, and some he did alone. And then later, Bob, as you know, Jim Garrison actually somewhat deputized Frege and his assistant, Ann Dishler, to follow up on the Rose Cherami situation to try to locate her. Of course, she was already dead by that time, but I had the highest respect for what he did related to Mother, and of course what he spoke before committees in Washington. So I have a great deal of respect for him.
Now, as your mom worked for Jack Ruby, and she alleged that Ruby knew Oswald, could you talk a little bit about that and how she would have been in a position to overhear such things or to be privy to such knowledge about Ruby and Oswald, and what did she have to say about that?
Yes, it's one of the things I want your listeners to understand before I answer your question is my goal through all of this research process, and actually at the insistence of Deborah Conway at JFK Lancer, I had to be able to document everything that I referred to in the book. So I was looking for accurate information, particularly, yes, as it related to Jack Ruby, Mother's involvement at the Carousel Club, what she did before then, what she did at the time that Kennedy was assassinated, but she was actively employed at the Carousel Club. And by this time in her life, she probably had lost some of her attractiveness as far as being a dancer or entertainer compared to when she was younger and life had not beat her up so badly. But she was a very important person in the prostitution and drug distribution and collection of monies related to those distributions for the mob through Jack Ruby at the Carousel Club. So I just want your listeners to know that I have never had a desire to make up anything about any aspect of my mother's story. None of the aspects of her story have scared me. Yes, they've been difficult to deal with, but through the entire process, all I actually ever wanted to do was uncover every potential aspect of truth that I could.
Which I think you've done quite a job in presenting that, and it's helped researchers very much to look at the information you've come with, and for me to see your personal journey has been very edifying to me. But how would your mom be rated as an informant? Now, she was in this world and she had provided information at different times. Could we talk about the import of some of it and how it has stood the test of time?
Do you mean her informant nature with the FBI?
Yeah, and in the times when she spoke about, even on the weekend in question with the heroin shipment that was coming in, and in general her work with the FBI. You can go into that as you see fit.
Yeah, well, I've always found it very interesting that in spite of Mother's reputation as in the minds of some people as nothing more than trash that could be easily discarded when it was convenient to do so, there was a thread of honesty that ran through her character. I think sometimes we jump to conclusions. When we say the phrase heroin addict, most of us make immediate judgments about the individual. We may actually make assumptions that this is a person who could never tell the truth about anything, who could never be trusted about anything. And in actuality, that is not always the case. Certainly isn't the case in Mother's situation, in her case. She was raised in what I would refer to as a Christian-based home. And I'm sure she was taught to tell the truth, although she spent much of her life lying. sometimes probably to protect her life, many times to protect my life as a young child. But when it got down to what we call in Texas as getting down to the lick log of a situation, when it got down to the importance of the information that she knew about our president being in danger, I believe that it was her best nature that rose up and caused her to speak out and do everything that she could to warn authorities. Unfortunately, she was ignored. Now, as we said just a second ago, Mother's life was very complicated. She not only lived on the left-hand lane of life in her involvement with drugs, prostitution, the mob, etc. Later in her life, I believe that my research clearly points to the fact that the FBI was very aware of her involvement in all of these activities, and at some point probably offered her safety or some kind of protection if she would offer information. In fact, all of her offering of information reaches all the way back to the early 50s when she was still in Houston and in close relationship with a very prominent detective, Detective William Billnitzer of the Houston Police Department. He was the head of all of the drug activities in the Houston area, which was large, which was extensive. And Billnitzer in the early 50s was really well known for his ability to track down and arrest those who were involved in drug distribution, etc. And one of the ways that he did it was through the formation of an extensive team of informants, which included Mother. And the way that we know that was included at the time of Billnitzer's death, one of the things that was discovered in his possession was something like a little black notebook that kept the names and contact information of all of his informants, and Rose Cheramy was included in that document. Later on in life, near the end of Mother's life, she had been contacted by the FBI. She was an active FBI informant. She has an FBI number. I have documentation proving that. And oddly, at the end of near the end of her life, when she was living in Florida, she was actually being paid monthly by the government, quote unquote, for life. She was receiving checks every month from the government, paying her for some aspect of her informant status. So, I mean, we know for sure that she walked down both of these lanes. And Bob, you and I both know that it takes someone with a pretty strong intellect to live walking down both sides of the fence as long as she was able to live.
Yeah, absolutely. It must have been a tightrope walk, and it must have been very grueling on one's nerves. But as the weekend of Kennedy's death came, and she provided information largely through Francis Frugier, the information she provided seemed to stand up. She talked about a seaman who was on a ship who was bringing in a heroin shipment, bringing money for that payoff. This seemed to bear out, and most interestingly, as they were following this sailor, they lost track of him somehow, as if, the Keystone Cops were in charge of it. But could you tell us a little more about that?
Yes, what you just referred to is a very interesting situation. And by the way, everything that she reported to Frugier about this particular situation was proven to be exactly true. I mean, Mother reported that at the time she was to get $8,000 payment for her involvement in this drug transaction. She received $29,000 cash to be taken to a man. I'm sorry, I'm having a brain fart at the moment about his name. It'll come to me. But he was to come in on a ship in Galveston, and actually his name was Tony Vincent Malone. He was a known heroin dealer and club owner who was alleged to have been directly associated with Jack Ruby. And all of that was proven, but somehow that individual must have gotten a tip, because when they went to the ship, they were not able to locate this individual, but everything Mother relayed about it was indeed true. And, you know, you can imagine that with every step of confirmed information by Frugier, you know, his opinion and value for Rose's offerings and tales certainly increased in value to him.
Now, Rose had also said that Oswald and Ruby had known each other, and she said that to Frugier, and that they were bedmates together. And
Yes.
This seems to be a theme through some of the case. Clay Shaw, David Ferry, Perry Russo, and other people seem to have been involved in the same lifestyle. But what do you make? How does she connect them? What did she say about them? What do you make of the Ruby and Oswald connection after you've looked at this for so long? In your mind, what do you see between the two?
Well, Bob, you and I both know that when you look at what is presented through the media to Americans and indeed the world, I've just come to know that what I should ask questions immediately about what I'm being told. And at that time, the public was being told that Ruby and Oswald had no connection. And actually, the way this all came down, Frugier and my mother were together on a flight headed down to Galveston, and my mother noticed a newspaper in the seat that had a headline that said basically Oswald has no connection to Jack Ruby, etc., that they didn't know each other. And Mother just evidently burst out in laughter and said, "You've got to be kidding. Not only do these guys know each other, they've been bed partners for years." And of course, earlier in our conversation, we talked about how is it that Mother gained this kind of insight about all of this, about these details. Well, when Mother and all of the other girls that worked in the Carousel Club, they were constantly around people like Ruby, Oswald, members of the Dallas Police Department, FBI agents, all in the Carousel Club. But of course, nobody thought anything about Mother. I mean, who would have worried about what she heard? I mean, she was a nobody in that paradigm. She was merely a tool to be used for prostitution and drug couriering. So no one really worried about if she had heard anything, but I guarantee you, she knew them from the Carousel Club, have observed them together, so none of this was a shock to her, and she wanted to make sure that Frugier knew that she knew better than what the newspaper was telling everyone.
Now, as we connect that with a quote prediction, we'll call it, of what she said was going to happen to Kennedy and Dallas, and then it happened. So we tie the two things together, that she worked for Ruby. She said, she was aware of Oswald. She saw them together in the paper, and she had predicted to the doctors and nurses in the hospital and to Frugier, Officer Frugier, what would happen. Could you, in a synopsis, in your own words, that would best have us understand it, what was it that she said to them? This is what's about to happen. This is going to happen in Dallas. It's happening. Please do something. How would you synopsize what she was giving the warning as?
Well, actually, I think this is one of the strong points of Mr. Stone's film. The little vignette that he presents at the beginning of the film, where she is in the hospital and ranting about that the president is in danger. That is indeed true, but it's even a little more extensive than that. She was hospitalized at the time at East Louisiana State Hospital, and even when everyone in their television room was watching the recordings, obviously we didn't watch all of this live,